Fire up your setups and lock in. Broadcasting straight out of the 918, we are turning the volume all the way up. From the epic tournament clutches to the ultimate community plays, this is your front line pass to the gaming scene. Tap the ready button. You're listening to T-Town Spawn Point Podcast. Let's play. Welcome back, everyone, to Spawn Point. I'm Mr. Edge, and this is episode 2, where we're going to go over youth esports and coaching. I'm in the studio with Caden Hudson, and we're going to talk about the youth development and how it goes about. First, I want to introduce Caden. He's a former coach of the Epic Charter Schools esports team who led that squad all the way to a massive stage at DreamHack Dallas. Hey, Caden, if you could give us a little backstory about yourself and what got you to the point where you're at now, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Kaiden Hudson. My gamer tag is Omega Rho and has been for most of my adult life now. And kind of what set me on this path for esports and specifically esports coaching at the K-12 level is when I was in college, I was a collegiate wrestler. And when I was on campus at my college, during the off season, you kind of had two options to either go get in trouble or find ways to not go get in trouble as a student athlete. And so I chose the path that kept me out of trouble and kept me with my scholarship. And every Friday night there was Halo tournaments at the student center. And I actually got kicked out of the first two because after I played, I beat everyone so bad that they thought I was cheating. And so they said that unless I get a controller that like the guy that was organizing it had, that I was not allowed to play. And I took his controller, still won. And then they ended up asking me, like, how was I so good? Like, what am I doing? And all that stuff. So I actually kind of, like, gave them impromptu coaching right then and there. And then we kind of saw that the local college Halo scene predominantly got stronger and stronger to where I was no longer always winning. Or, like, my team wasn't always winning, like, whatever team I got put on. And so that kind of always stuck with me in the back of my head. And then as I got more involved with esports, especially during, like, the pandemic and the school was looking for alternative ways to get kids involved now that there was like nothing to do even outside of school, I kind of offered up esports as an alternative and an option because I already had a little bit of coaching background because I coached wrestling at the high school level and then at the collegiate level, and then I played video games my entire life. I actually spent a short stint being an H5 pro amateur, making my way through that major scene. I actually made my way to one specific LAN out in Dallas right before it was qualified for Worlds. And so, like, I had both esports experience to a degree, but I had a lot of coaching experience through wrestling. And so once those two kind of crossed, that's how I ended up becoming a head coach at Epic Charter Schools for the first time. Like, that was my first, like, official, I got paid to do this consistently job.
That's awesome. And you guys did awesome when you were coaching for Epic Charter Schools, too. Tell us a little bit about going through your career with Epic on teaching these teenagers to control their ego and handling communication and stuff like that instead of being just your typical gamer,
Yeah. So what I kind of quickly realized, especially for a lot of our esports kids, is that there was a lot of students who they had always played a game, even if it was a team-based game like Valorant, Overwatch, what have you. It's always a team-based game, but they've never been on a consistent team. So like their entire exposure to this game has always been every match I play is with some randoms, or it's like with me and my best friend and then 4 or 5 other random people on my team. And there's a dichotomy there that these kids develop that like, oh, well, I'm so good because I keep climbing the ladder and then I never see these people again. And so I assume they're stuck there or they suck, right?
Yeah.
And so they kind of start to get this ego about them because they're really good. And then when they get on a team and they may be on a team with ranks that aren't as high as them, they're like, why am I on this team? Like, we're never going to win. And so the first thing was setting that expectation that like playing an organized, structured team consistently is a whole different ballgame than playing for 6 hours straight, playing with a bunch of randoms who are at the same skill level as you, quote unquote. Another thing that I kind of had to put in perspective for a lot of the really good players was that while they may be predominantly quote unquote carrying the team like on paper, if they don't work with their team, they're not going to have success. And that was pretty much true with whatever game I ever coached that was a team-based game. When we did our first year of Valorant, and that was also the first year that we won state in Valorant, like on paper, we were not a very good team. We had one player that was an immortal who like had hit immortal peak. He wasn't immortal consistently. And then we had one diamond player, and then everyone else was gold or lower. So like we had two fairly decent players, but then everyone else was kind of like the average, Valorant player. And then the team that was slated to win, and it was the ranked number one team through the entire season, was full of Ascendants and Immortals. And we ended up seeing them at state, and we ended up beating them because we realized they didn't play well as a team. And I don't care how good you are at Valorant, if you're going against a group of 5 people that are well organized, the best you can hope to do is get a kill before you die. And we took advantage of that fact, and we actually ended up winning state simply because we played better as a team, not because we were the better team mechanically or per player, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I preach that constantly with our kids about
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what rank you are. As long as you guys play well as a team and all have team chemistry, you'll win a tournament with ease.
Well, yeah, I mean, my Halo team was my model citizens, is what I always kind of put it, because they started the game never playing any Halo game before in their life. And then when they started playing Halo Infinite, like, they had never played a Halo game. They had never held a controller for Halo. They didn't even know what the name of the guns were. They didn't know Master Chief. Like, they knew zero Halo anything. And so they went from never playing the game to winning the state championship their very first year around, because they, the coach, my assistant coach at the time who coached that team, preached what I preached. It was, you have to have consistency, you got to have teamwork, you got to have good communications, you got to make sure that you guys are working together as a team at all times, stuff like that. And after they won, 2 of those kids actually ended up really enjoying the game. They wanted to take it really serious. And by the end of it, actually, when that year that Epic went to DreamHack, 2 of our Epic kids who played Halo went to DreamHack on their own with 2 other kids that they found in the high school community. And they entered into that open that was at DreamHack Dallas, in 2024. And they ended up getting into the same pool as what would be later on in that season for HCS, the World Champions, which was Shopify Rebellion. And they took a single map off of them. They didn't win, but it kind of goes to show that just 3 years prior, they went from not knowing anything about the game to literally being strong contenders against world champion talent.
See, that's awesome. That's so cool to see kids grow like that too.
Well, absolutely. And it just showed that, like, you have these kids that have been playing these games for, like, Overwatch or Rocket League. They've been playing these games for years, and they get stuck, and they're like, I'm never going to be better, or like, I can't get better, and it's my teammates that are causing me to lose. And it's like, no, you're just not in the environment to help you grow. Like, you could go take anyone from, like, the OKC Thunder, and if you didn't give them structure, you didn't give them the environment to get as good as they are now, we would not have the same Thunder team. Like, if they only went to the YMCA, if they only went to go play pickup games, they would probably get really good, but they wouldn't get NBA good. And that's, like, the difference that I try to tell kids is, like, you're essentially playing random pickup games all day, every day, and you're not actually getting better in a way that's going to matter.
Yep. I agree with that. When you're standing behind a squad on a live tournament floor, what is exactly the specific moment that you can tell the difference between a group of talented individual playing solo or a true synergy squad on the playfield?
The biggest one is, like, the biggest key takeaway is the composure. That when something inevitably goes wrong, how they handle that. And so, like, when you have a really talented player that is a good, like, solo player, they're a good ladder player and ranked, they don't take things going wrong consistently very well. And so, like, when a game starts to go south, you're behind in rounds, eco, you're down, you're like an Overwatch and you're down by one map in a set of 3. They kind of progressively get worse and worse. They start making worse decisions. Their fundamentals start to... Versus when you see someone who is a really good teammate, the mentality and the attitude is much different. They're like, hey, it's all right, shake it off, or hey, that's my bad, or hey, let's not do that again, let's try to fix it this way. And they have this composure about them that is very much like, hey, that happened 12 seconds ago. We don't got the next 12 seconds to cry about it.
Yeah.
And there's that mentality there that, and those are the kids that really, like, they take loss in stride, but they take loss as a point of learning. Whereas as a ladder player or someone who just plays random public games or ranked games all day by yourself, you don't have to face that reality of, oh, well, it was my fault that we lost, or I'm making a bad mistake, because you're with a whole nother group of people who has know nothing about your last game. Right. And so, like, you get to kind of go through your quote unquote competitive career, climbing the ladder without anyone ever knowing your weaknesses, ever knowing your strengths. And you just assume that you're not the reason that you're losing games, even though you're the common denominator. And so that's something that when I'm standing behind a squad, or even like when I was doing tryouts, and even at the collegiate level when I've coached there, I'll see really talented kids. And the first thing I do is I put in a situation where they're not going to win. Like, I've been in where, like, for Valorant tryouts, I've told kids who, like, were helping me watch tryouts and watch for talented individuals, I'd be like, hey, make a dumb decision. Like, go out, die, make a dumb decision, and let's put weight on this new kid and see how he handles it. And when it falls apart, that shows me that they're still talented, but they're not great team players. And that's something as a coach, you kind of have to work with. Like as a high school coach, that's what you're designed to do. You're supposed to help kids be better team players. But I can tell you at the collegiate level, recruiters will look at that and cross your name off the list and go down the line.
And that's something you see a lot too, is a lot of these coaches that are coaching like high school esports, they don't know much about the game, but they know how to keep a team synergized together in order for them to win games. A lot of these coaches have never played some of the games that they're coaching, but you really don't need to. As long as you can keep a team on track and on pace of what they're doing, it's really all you need as a coach.
Yeah, and I think also to put into the perspective that like your job as a player isn't to always win, because you're not always going to win. But I think as a coach, to help the students understand that is you got to build like a winning culture. Like even though winning isn't the overall goal, it is still an expectation. Again, huge wrestler and someone that I always admired growing up was John Smith, who coached at Oklahoma State University. He would always tell his kids that like his job as a coach was not to make sure that they won every single match, because statistically that is just not going to happen. But that doesn't mean that winning is not an expectation in a program of greatness and a legacy that demands it. And that always stuck with me, because that was something that at the end of the day, whatever kid I got, whether it was a brand new player to a game or someone that was, almost a top 500 ranked player, they were going to be a part of something greater than themselves, that this would end eventually for them. Like they only had 4 years with me if they started from the beginning. Like when this ends, what do they look back on? What did they leave for the next group? And one of my notions to the kids when they were all seniors is I always said, I just hope that one day when you're old and you're rocking in your rocking chair, you're either on your phone, listening to the radio, you hear that the Epic Charter Schools esports team or program has won their 100th championship or they broke another record, and that they hopefully smile thinking about when they were in that seat and when they were building that legacy. Because like that is what is a driver and like that sense of pride that a lot of really good programs, regardless of what kind of program.
Absolutely. So, with you being a wrestling coach and an esports coach, what are the differences and similarities between a traditional sport, quote unquote, and esports?
So I think the differences are kind of the most obvious, and like obviously like remove the physicality aspect of it. Like don't even let that be an equation, because that's not really a good metric to measure difference. But I think the biggest difference is actually the fact that there isn't really a physical limiter on esports versus traditional sports. And what I mean by that is that like you can only get so fast before you see diminishing returns. You can only get so strong before you see diminishing returns. Like you'll always get stronger, but when you're a certain weight, a certain height, a certain physical makeup, like you can only lift so much weight. In esports, there really is nothing to measure by that. Like there is human reaction time and things like that with like aim trainers. But when it comes to like, take Overwatch, like there's not really you can only be such a good Overwatch player. Like there is a leaderboard, but like that leaderboard is always moving. Like that, the number one from a year ago is no longer the number one from today, or the number one from 2016 when it launched is no longer the same number one player as it is today.
Yeah.
And so there's not this hard cap that's tangible. And I think that's really a fascinating aspect of esports, is that like there's always room for improvement. There's always room for growth. And even, I mean, heck, Smash has been out for how long now? And we're still finding tech in Smash, in like Smash Brothers, not just Ultimate, but like Smash Brothers Melee still, like a game that's almost 20 years old. And so like there's just this fascination of always getting better, and there's never a wall or a ceiling to stop you. The similarities, though, I think there's actually a lot more similarities than there are differences.
There is. I agree.
Just like with wrestling, like wrestling is a very technical sport. Like there's the equivalent of that is the mechanics you have in your aim versus the technique that you do in wrestling. And so like I have someone that there's that same concept in your aim, like making sure that you're in a good posture, making sure that your forearm is in line with your mouse and your mouse isn't crooked in your hand. Like there's a lot of fundamentals and mechanics that you have to learn in esports, just from a basic standpoint, that you almost have to not think about, just like you do with any other sport. Like baseball, I always use them as an example. If anyone that's ever played baseball, I think you've always heard like step, squash, swing, squash the bug.
Mm-hmm.
When you practice that so often, you don't even think about that process. You do it so it's muscle memory. You don't even think about it. And when you get into esports, the physical layer of the game is your keyboard and mouse, your controller. Like, okay, if I'm on keyboard and mouse, making sure again, my posture's good, my forearm is in line with my mouse isn't crooked in my hand, I have the correct sense on my mouse. Like, you do all these things naturally to where you don't have to think about it, so you can focus on other parts of your game, which is the game sense part, which in baseball is like, hey, if I'm seeing his hand come up higher over his shoulder or it's more at his ear, the difference between a curveball and a fastball. Like, that's the kind of thing that people don't take into account. And I'll get a lot of kids that come into my programs and I'll watch them play, and they're phenomenal players, and I look down and they have the worst posture as they're playing. Their mouse is almost completely sideways, and they can't hit a right flick shot to save their life because they're so leaned heavy left that it's like, hey, let's fix a couple of things and let's actually improve your game with the easiest thing to do first, which is actually getting you to sit correctly and to move correctly on your actual physical space.
And that brings me back to, you don't have to know the game to coach esports. Like, there's a lot of other things that coaches can teach kids on how to improve their game skills and improve things just by, like you said, their posture, the way that their arms resting on their table, just different little things like that you don't have to be a pro at a game to be a coach. Like, you could literally, if you coach one game, you could probably coach them all, just for the fact of, as long as you can teach the kids how to play and how to sit properly and do the proper, be good teammates.
Right. You want to know a hot take I have?
Yeah.
I always said that if you want to have one of the best esports teams in the country, you need to work with your track coach at your school. And the reason I say that is that these kids aren't going to run very far. Like, we know that, like, the sport itself does not demand them to run 6 miles.
Yeah.
But what it needs to teach them is how to control their breathing, control their heart rate, and how to work in short bursts. And that is something that a track coach is very, very good at, especially with like short sprinters, long jumpers, things like that. And the reason I find that very important, and this is something that I do with my kids as well, that before every match, we do something that spikes our heart rate. Whether that's we get in the game and we try to get like our quote unquote first match out of the way, like we make them play just a public match altogether, try to finish it as quickly as possible. Like, we used to have a leaderboard of like the fastest games that we've ever played, like during practice or live. And there were like, we got to a point to where games were starting to get finished within like seconds of each other on this leaderboard.
Man.
And like, we actually had to break it out into categories by title because like we found out that like a Splatoon match could literally take 35 seconds. And so we had to like kind of adjust it. But the reason we did that is because that anxiety, that adrenaline that rushes through, like I'm about to break a record, that spikes your heart rate. And that's where your muscle memory starts to really kick in. Like, your game sense that you've been trying to master, it really starts to kick in. And that really shows you your flaws in what you don't do in a high-paced environment. Some programs that I've had recently, I had a school out in Idaho that the kids would actually do jumping jacks and push-ups like really quick right before they'd sit down and start a match, or like before they start to warm up for a match, because it spikes that heart rate. They start playing and they actually start warming up with their heart rate already elevated. So that way when they're in match, it was Valorant. So like when they were in a 1v1 situation, they had to clutch it up. That heart rate didn't bother them as much. They didn't get nervous. They didn't start to panic because they were used to physically feeling that heart rate. And so that's why I always said that, like, if you make esports kids actually do physical activity to mimic that, it makes them funny enough, it makes them more composed and it makes them last a longer. Because another thing that it helps is with tournament endurance. Because everyone's been at LANs that you show up at 9 a.m. and you don't get to leave till almost 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And that's that. At that point, it doesn't really matter who's really good at the game, because if you're tired, exhausted, and you're making bad mistakes, there's nothing you can do to overcome that. And that's where like that conditioning actually does help a little bit.
I've never thought of it like that. Never thought about making the kids do jumping jacks and stuff. We might actually utilize that in our academy program. Now that you say that,
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's not. I mean, we're not making them sweat. We're not making them they're not about to go run a triathlon. But it's just something very subtle to help just spike that heart rate. And when you start training under that condition, that's when you actually start to cement in those fundamentals, that game sense, that decision making, because you're doing it at like the most inoptimal position physically as you can, and then at that point nothing else will phase you. Like when you start to play composed, cooled, that mistakes become almost non-existent.
That's crazy to think about. I never thought about that. So if for any of our kid listeners, if you could give them any piece of advice, when they're coming into esports and high school level esports, and then maybe even collegiate esports, what is one thing that you would want them to know before entering into high school and collegiate esports?
If I had to give them one piece of advice, it would be to, number one, take that first step and getting involved in that community. But before you walk in that door, leave your ego to the side. Leaving your ego to the side will do a lot more for you than trying to show off and show it and trying to prove why you should be on that team. Because the fact of the matter is that anyone can get better at a video game. Like, I truly and wholeheartedly believe that if you set out in your mind to be the number one best player in any game that you choose, you have the ability to do so. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. But it is physically capable for everyone involved. I have seen rank 1 players in games where they truly are not able to use a keyboard or mouse or a controller. They're having to use an accessibility and adaptive controller, and they've climbed the ranks to be ranked number 1. And so for me, it's leave your ego to the side. And for those that don't have an ego, congratulations. But also put your fear of mistakes to the side. The biggest thing with gamers is that for some reason or another, they are terrified of making mistakes. Yeah. And I think losing. and losing. And I think gaming is one of the things that, like, it is statistically going to happen to you more often than you're ever going to win in your lifetime of a game. And making an alt account doesn't count because you still have 500 hours, 3 years worth of things. Because, like, I've been playing Halo for 20 years, right? Yeah. And now when I play Halo Infinite, like, I looked at my win percentage, it's like in the 80 percentile when I'm not playing ranked. And, like, that's extremely high. Like, I'm winning so many games that I almost can see the games that I've lost within a year's span, not even days. But I remember how many times I used to lose in Halo 2, how bad I sucked at Halo 3, how frustrated I was in Halo Reach. Like, I have 20 years of experience with as well as 20 years of losses. And those losses compounded to where when Halo Infinite came out, I got really good at it. And it's not because I was, God's gift to Halo Infinite. It's not because I'm Mr. Microsoft. It's just because I have 20 years of experience. And the same thing with, like, wrestling. Like, something with wrestling is that you never win your first match. Like, no. Statistically speaking, you almost never win your first match. And the ones that do, I assume it's because it was a forfeit.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it from that perspective, like, of course you're not going to win your first online game ever. And I always try to put that as, like, everyone who has ever been on a team has lost their first game just like you have. And I think that kind of shows you that that's the road that you can go on, that everyone's lost their first game, and there is still fakers. There is still, ranked 1 Valorant players. There's still ranked 1 Overwatch players in the world. Every single one of them have more than likely lost their very first game.
That's a good thing. That's some good advice for some new players coming into the high school and collegiate level. I want to talk about practices, a little bit behind the scenes on the hustle that these kids do for practices. So to get a school team or to the national level with VOD reviews, they have to be sometimes brutal, especially if they lose. How do you rip apart the matches to replay, deliver heavy, honest criticism to these high schoolers without completely crushing the motivation to queue back up?
Because, again, like, having experience in doing VOD reviews in wrestling, football, and rugby, things like that, you always set up the expectation that, like, this is going to feel bad. This might hurt your feelings. But the intent behind it is so this doesn't happen again. And so when this exact situation inevitably happens again, we come out on the other side, and instead of putting a loss on our record, it's a win. Or instead of when this interaction happens and your KD spread's terrible, it's going to start leaning in the positive direction. And it's one of those things that as coaches, especially esports coaches who have never done VOD reviews before, you have to remember that for everything that you're pointing out that's negative, you also have to remember to point out the things that they're actually doing right, and then compare and contrast them of, like, why that works versus when something else happens almost in the same situation and it didn't happen. Okay, this is obviously, you can see why it went wrong.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do with VOD reviews is we talk nothing about game sense. We talk nothing about, like, who's supposed to use the alt, who's the eco, who's this, who's that. It's always positioning. And positioning is something that I think a coach can always understand after they've learned, like, a few basics of the game. Like, they don't have to be masters of the game. They don't have to be, like, top level players. As long as they understand, like, the very basics of the game, positioning becomes one of the easiest things to understand, because it's like positioning in football, wrestling, basketball, whatever. And one of my favorite things is that I always do what I call the "what were you thinking" exercise. Because I'll watch someone on, like, Overwatch that's, like, very much not a flank player, or like it's a tank player that's not a dive tank, and they're off in no man's land. And I pause the video before any interaction happens, and I ask them, "What are you thinking? Do you remember what you were thinking?" And you usually get one of two answers. You usually get the deer in the headlights, like no, and then we watch them do something very dumb, and you're like, it looks like you didn't know what you were thinking there either. So next time, let's put a little bit more thought about like what we're doing. Did we communicate this? All that stuff. Or the other answer is that you usually get from them is, oh well, my plan was doing this, 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 and this. And I said, okay, did you relay any of that to your team? Because it looks like none of them understand what you're about to do. And he's like, no, I didn't say anything because it happened too fast. I go, then it doesn't matter what you were thinking, because your teammates are also trying to win the game and they need to know what you're thinking. And that kind of reels them back to where the VOD review had nothing to do with game sense. It had nothing to do with really even positioning at its core. It was communication. Because I remember, because like when we would also have other teammates who were like point that out, they would actually start running their own VOD reviews. And as soon as we would pause, we'd have kids go, "Coach, I know what you're going to ask." And the answer is I wasn't thinking, or I didn't communicate it, and this was my plan, and I know it wasn't going to work. And I'm like, okay, we're still going to go through this exercise, and you're still going to see this on screen in front of God and everybody. But they started to fundamentally understand they were catching their own mistakes in VOD reviews before I was able to point them out. And that meant that they started to think about this in game a lot more. Like, we started to see a lot less players randomly try to go for flanks when that is not their job. We started to see a lot less players do dumb things like buy an op when they're not supposed to and not tell anyone until they die with it. And so that was a really big like aha moment for a lot of kids, was that like pointing out your flaws is not to pick on you and tell you suck, because even grandmasters, make mistakes. Even Radiant players make mistakes. They just make fewer of them. But it helps them get better. And then they consciously, when they start to play and practice, they consciously think about that. And then they're like, oh, well, I'm going to do this again, but now I'm going to hold off, or I'm going to do it differently, and hopefully have a better chance of success.
That's awesome. That is probably one of the better VOD reviews, like scenario situations that I've heard from a coach. And we have 6 of them here. Like a lot of the kids absolutely hate doing VOD reviews here. And I think a lot of it has to be the coaches don't understand how to do them. They always just call out their negativity instead of the positivity. So it's showing them what they're doing wrong and how to fix it, but not encouraging positivity within the VOD review.
Yeah, and like I played football, and I played football for Bixby High.
Boy. And
like every morning at 6 a.m. throughout the regular season, we had VOD reviews before we went out to do our morning lifts.
Yeah.
And I was a running back, and once a week we had to go with the linemen to watch lineman VOD reviews for 7-on-7s and for line of scrimmage drills that we were VOD review. Like, we reviewed practice drills. That's how serious we were. And I remember one time, my very first time walking into the lineman deal as a freshman, because like I was on the scout team as a freshman, and I remember watching this VOD review with this O-line coach that I did not know who he was. He was brand new to the program when Coach Montgomery came in, and I was the first one up on the film for the drill, and I made a dumb mistake. I don't even remember what it was, and I remember he railed into me. He railed into me then again the next day, and I'm sitting here going like, I there's no way I can do this. Like, this is way too intense. The very next play, obviously, after he railed into me, I corrected it. I did something very good, made like a simulated touchdown, whatever. And he didn't say anything then, but then in the film, he stopped and he goes, "And that's what improvement looks like, and that's why you're going to be a great player." And it was kind of whiplash. And I'm like, okay, in any other situation, this is borderline like, I think someone needs to get phone called. But it did something to me where I go, well, hey, this guy, like, he's railing into me, and he's a little scary because he's loud, but he also recognizes when I'm doing something good, and there is like that's getting noticed. And I think as a coach, that is such a big thing to remind yourself of, is that like you got to work with these kids on their mistakes, otherwise they won't get better. But you still got to celebrate them in their victories, because that's what's going to motivate them to get better.
Yeah, something I always tell the kids is, it doesn't matter how mean the coach is. All they're trying to do is get you better at the game that you're playing. They love what you do. They love that you're here. They just want to see you improve. They're not saying something to you to make you worse at the game. They're saying it to you because they want to see you get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that, like, as a coach, that is our job. Our job is to not rail into you, make you quit. Our job is to not try to turn you into the next, faker or the next all-star eSports player. We're not going to turn you into Donk from CS. Our goal is to make you just better people, and the medium to do that just happens to be video games.
Yep. I agree. So for this last part, before I let you go, on the spawn point, we do this thing called a lightning round. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and you're going to answer the first thing that pops in your head, the first answer that pops in your head. All right? All right, here we go. First question. The absolute best competitive game for teaching a kid how to communicate in a team environment.
Rocket League.
Keyboard and mouse or controller for high-stake local tournament settings.
That one's game dependent, I guess, but I'm going to say on average, keyboard and mouse.
Okay. The single worst bad habit the casual player needs to unlearn immediately.
Playing for long extended periods of time make you better. It doesn't.
What was the go-to snack or fuel that kept the Epic squad alive during the DreamHack grind?
Lots of water and Gatorade. A couple of different snacks of choice because, some kids liked protein, some kids liked, peanuts, some kids were allergic to peanuts. So the snacks was always a little bit random. But I will say that the number one thing that we always had at every LAN, at least for most teams, was ironically a pack of gum.
Really?
It was just something to put in your mouth. It helped with focus. It's like, well, I'm hungry, I'm nervous. It helped just ease something.
Yeah.
And at one point in time, for every state tournament, I would have to buy a huge pack of 5 gum from Sam's because by the time the first team was on stage, and because I made my players watch as many matches as they could before they had to go home after state, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember that at one point we had every single team there, and we had 40 kids at state, and they were all watching Rocket League play. Every single one of them got their own pack of gum, and I think they all went through the pack of gum by the end of the first match. And then they asked me for more, and I just send someone to a gas station to get more.
Jeez. Well, man, I really appreciate you coming by and doing this podcast with me. If anybody wants to chat with you or get a hold of you about, well, maybe even some coaches want to chat with you about some things, where can they find you at?
So they can find me on pretty much every social media. My name is just Omega Row, or I'm Omega Row, depending on the platform. So I'm pretty easy to find in that sense. On Discord, just Omega Row, all one word, all lowercase, nothing too hard about that.
You want to spell it?
Yeah, OMEGARHO, all one word, usually all the time. And then if they coaches specifically, if they ever want to email me, they can always reach out to me at khudson or KHUDSON at okse.org.
And that's another thing eventually I want to do a podcast on is the OKSE and get some of you guys in this and see how tournaments are ran within the local high school scene. That'd be cool.
Absolutely. I got plenty of people that you can talk to.
Yeah. Well, again, I appreciate it, Caden. Thanks for coming on board, and I'll chat with you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
See ya. And that wraps up another episode of T-Town Spawn Point Podcast. Remember, the local gaming community only grows when we squad up, so stop solo queuing, head out to T-Town eSports, and let's keep leveling up the 918 together. Don't get left on that loading screen. Make sure to hit that follow button so you never miss an episode drop. GG's everybody. Stay locked in, and we'll see you back at the Spawn Point next week.